My name is Marcus Vance. Back in '97, I wore the stripes of a Green Beret, and I believed the world was a simple place. There were those who did the shooting and those who got shot. But Persad Province, that place chewed up my faith and spat it out along with my men. If you're hearing this, it means the top secret seal on Project Pale Knot has finally rotted away. Officially, we were humping through the jungle to recover a downed recon drone worth $5 million. But there was the unofficial side. The side the colonel whispered to me in a lead-lined bunker while his hand shook. Seconds before that drone vanished from the radar, it transmitted 3 frames. The first was just the endless green ocean of the Cambodian canopy. The second showed a black spot, perfectly circular, like a hole in reality itself, scorched right into the center of the forest. And the third. In that third frame, the camera caught the clouds, but they were below the trees. And the ground in that photo was transparent, like glass, and through it, something massive and impossibly old was looking back up. The drone didn't just crash, it ceased to exist for every instrument we had. It was like physics in that square mile just took a rain check. There were 6 of us. Lieutenant Savan, a Khmer local who spent the week before the op enchanting his ammunition, claiming that normal lead wouldn't stop the one who eats shadows. Corporal Miller, our comms tech, who started hearing voices on the radio 2 days before we even deployed. They weren't rebel transmissions. It was the sound of children crying, mixed with white noise, even though there wasn't a living village within 60 miles of our LZ. Then there was Doc West, a couple of hired guns, and Coda, my Belgian Malinois. You know, the jungle is never quiet. It's a mad orchestra of birds, monkeys, and cicadas. But the moment we crossed the line into Sector Zephyr, the jungle flipped the switch. Instant silence. The only thing left was a low, subsonic hum, like a high-voltage power line. And the smell. The smell of ozone and old, damp paper from a basement that hasn't been opened in a century. Coda froze at the perimeter. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. She just stood there, staring at an empty trail, and tears, actual tears, started rolling down her face. She was weeping from pure terror, but she wouldn't move a muscle. Our route was set for point 0, 45 clicks into the green hell. The colonel promised ideal conditions. "The satellite sees you every 10 seconds, Marcus," he told me. "Anything goes sideways, we'll have a bird on your head in 15 minutes. He was lying. He knew the satellite footage over that grid was nothing but gray static, like a broken TV set. By the first night, we realized the jungle had changed. The leaves on the trees weren't green. They were a dull, silvery gray, looking like they'd been dipped in liquid nitrogen, even though it was 90 degrees out. When I touched one, it didn't snap like a leaf. It disintegrated into a fine metallic dust. We set up camp in the massive roots of a strangler fig. Miller tried to dial in the comms, but he ripped the headset off after a minute. "Sarge, I can't listen to that," he said. His face was like ash. I took the headset. It wasn't static. It was a rhythm. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Like a massive, heavy heart was beating deep in the earth beneath our boots. And with every beat, the ground didn't just vibrate. It felt like it was shifting. On day 2, Savan started acting like a ghost. He refused to walk on the established trails. "We cannot leave footprints here," he whispered. "If the earth remembers the shape of your foot, it will never let you go." We followed a stream. The water was so clear it looked invisible. But when Doc tried to fill his canteen, he let out a shout. The water was arctic, not just cold, but bone-shattering. Within a second, his stainless steel canteen was covered in a thick layer of frost. And then I saw it. Savan's shadow. He was walking in front of me, the sun hitting his back. His shadow should have been projected forward, but his shadow, it was living its own life. It moved slower than he did. Savan would take a step, and the shadow would stay still for a heartbeat longer. And then, it started turning its head toward me, even though Savan was looking straight ahead. I blinked, and it was back to normal. But Coda started whimpering, pressing her body against my legs. The juvenile around us wasn't a forest anymore. It felt like a stage set, and someone, was waiting behind the curtain. By noon on the third day, we reached the Riang River. It wasn't black from silt. It was black by nature, like liquid obsidian. It didn't flow. It rolled in heavy, silent layers. No splashes, no sound. Savan drops to his knees, right in the muck. "This is the chasm of Kamaroka," he choked out. "This is where the world of men ends." I raised my binoculars. On the far bank, shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog, I saw something that made my brain go numb. It was a mule. One of ours. We'd supposedly lost it during the crossing on day 1. It was standing perfectly still, but its legs were twice as long as they should have been, and it had no hooves. Instead, long, pale fingers grew out of its joints, digging deep into the river mud. "Sarge!" Miller's voice was trembling. "The radio! It just turned itself on!" From the speaker clipped to his shoulder, my own voice came out. But it wasn't a recording of me from the past. It was me, right now. "Sarge, the radio! It just turned itself on," the speaker said, in a voice filled with a terror I hadn't even let myself feel yet. And in that moment, the river breathed. It wasn't the sound of water. It was the sound of air being forced out of a massive lung, mixed with the sound of grinding metal. A deep, resonating thrum that sent perfectly geometric ripples, triangles and squares across the water. Clutch! The sound didn't come from outside. It vibrated inside our skulls. Coda suddenly let out a high-pitched howl and bolted into the brush, ignoring my shouts. "Look!" Doc yelled, pointing at the center of the river. Where the surface had been smooth, a mass began to rise. It didn't look like a crocodile or a fish. It was something matte gray, sleek, devoid of scales or fur. It rose and rose until a long, eyeless snout breached the surface. It wasn't looking at us. It had no eyes. It was listening to us with its entire body. And when it took its next breath, I felt the air around us turn thin. It was literally sucking the oxygen out of the space. In that moment, I knew. The drone didn't crash. It was eaten. And now, that thing had opened its mouth to swallow us, too. The thing in the water. It didn't dive back down. It didn't splash. It just receded. Like the river was a curtain, and it simply stepped behind it. The oxygen rushed back into my lungs so fast it burned. I stood there, gasping, watching those perfect geometric ripples fade into nothingness. Savan was still on his knees, his forehead pressed into the black muck. He was chanting something in a dialect I'd never heard, a low, rhythmic drone that sounded more like a machine than a prayer. "Miller, get him up!" I barked. My voice sounded thin, like it was coming from a radio in another room. "We're moving! Away from the bank! Now!" We scrambled back into the tree line, but the safety of the forest felt like a joke. About 50 yards in, where the trail bottlenecked between two massive silver-barked trees, we found them. The prints. I've tracked everything from insurgents in the mountains to jaguars in the basin. I know what an animal looks like when it touches the earth. This was wrong. They were handprints. Human hands, maybe a bit larger, pressed deep into the gray mud. But the fingers, they had too many joints. They looked like they'd been broken and reset a dozen times to form a circle. And at the end of each finger was a puncture wound in the mud, a claw, at least 8 inches long, that had been driven straight down into the soil. "Sarge," Miller whispered, his voice cracking. "Look at the stride." The prints weren't staggered like a walker. They were perfectly parallel. Whatever made them had hopped, or it had moved in a way that didn't require shifting its weight. And they were fresh. The mud was still oozing back into the center of the palm. "It's a taper, right?" one of the hired guns asked. He was clutching his rifle so hard his knuckles were white. "Just a big, weird taper?" Savan looked up then. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils narrowed to tiny pinpricks. "It is not a taper. It is the one who mimics. It has seen your hands, soldier. Now it wants to try them on." I told him to shut up. I didn't want to hear it. I signaled Miller to get HQ on the horn. We needed an emergency extraction. I didn't care about the drone anymore. I didn't care about the mission. Miller fumbled with the long-range radio, his fingers trembling. The static was different now. It wasn't white noise. It sounded like a choir of cicadas screaming in unison. Then the signal broke. "Base, this is Vance," Miller said into the mic. "We have an anomaly at point 0, requesting immediate evac. Do you copy?" A voice came through the speaker. It was clear, crystal clear. "Vance, this is Base," the voice said. My heart stopped. It wasn't the dispatcher. It was Miller's voice. Exactly Miller's voice. "We copy your request," the radio Miller said. "But you're not done. Look at the mud, Vance. Look at the fingers. Don't you want to see how they fit?" Miller dropped the mic like it was red hot. He backed away, his eyes darting around the canopy. "That wasn't me, Sarge. Tell me that wasn't me." "It's the distortion," I lied. I could feel the sweat freezing on my neck. "Interference. It's picking up our own signal and looping it. We keep moving toward the fort. That's the order." But the jungle wouldn't let us move fast. The silver leaves started to grow over the trail as we watched, vibrating with that subsonic hum. And then the mules started. They didn't just bray, they screamed, a wet, tearing sound. One of the mules, carrying the bulk of our food and the spare batteries, suddenly bucked. It didn't look like it was scared of a predator. It looked like it was being pulled. The heavy straps of its pack started to sink into its flesh, as if the cargo was becoming part of the animal. The mule collapsed, its legs splaying out at impossible angles. It didn't struggle, it just started to melt into the gray mud of the trail. 1 second it was there, braying in agony, and the next it was being drawn down into the earth like water through a drain. No hole, no predator, just the mud swallowing 500 pounds of muscle and steel. Half our supplies vanished in 10 seconds. The water where the mule went down became perfectly still, not a ripple, just flat gray silt. "Move!" I yelled. "Double time! Don't look at the ground!" We ran. We followed the bend of the river, but the river seemed to be following us. Every time I looked to the left, I'd see a wake in the black water. No head, no snout, just a V-shaped ripple moving at exactly our pace. That's when the first real memory glitch hit. I looked at Doc West, who was running beside me. I knew his name. I knew he was our medic. But for a split second, I couldn't remember what his face was supposed to look like. It was just a blur of flesh and bone. I looked at my own hands on my rifle, and they felt foreign, like I was wearing someone else's skin.
We reached a narrow gorge where the cliffs squeezed the river into a violent, frothing mess. I thought we were safe there. The water was too rough for anything to swim in. I was wrong. High up on the rock wall, inside a dark crevice, 2 eyes opened. They weren't round. They were horizontal slits, glowing with a thick amber light that didn't cast a reflection on the water. They didn't blink. They just watched us. And as we ran past, I heard it again, not in my ears, but in the marrow of my bones, that mechanical, grinding exhale. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. We were 82% ripe, and the harvester was finally stepping out of the shadows. We didn't run toward the fort because we wanted to. We ran because the jungle behind us was no longer a place of trees and dirt. It had become a mouth. Every time I looked back, the trail we'd just stepped off was gone, replaced by that thick, shimmering gray static. It was like the world was being deleted, 1 yard at a time, right at our heels. We hit the perimeter of Fort Arouet just as the sun began to dip below the canopy. It was an old French colonial relic, stone walls choked with vines. But as we crossed the threshold, I realized the vines weren't green. They were that same dead metallic silver. And the air, it didn't just smell like ozone anymore. It smelled like a hospital after a fire. "Perimeter secure!" Savan yelled, but his voice was hollow. He wasn't looking at the gates. He was looking at his own hands. His fingernails were gone. In their place were smooth silver plates that looked like they'd been machined in a lab. "Lieutenant Marks!" I shouted, staggering into the courtyard. "Marks, we've got an anomaly! We need a medic and a secure line!" Marks was sitting on a crate near the old well. He was clean. Too clean. His uniform looked like it had just come off the rack, even though he'd been in the bush for 3 months. He didn't look up. He was staring at a blank brick wall, his eyes wide and vacant. "Marks?" I walked up to him, my hand on my sidearm. He finally turned his head. His eyes, they weren't blue anymore. They were 2 flat silver mirrors. No pupils, no iris, just reflections. "Candidate Vance," he said. His voice was flat, like a recording played at half speed. "You're early. The ripeness isn't at peak yet. But the harvest doesn't like to wait."
The harvest doesn't like to wait. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. "Where's the rest of your squad, Marks? Where's the Overwatch?"
"They've been recalibrated," he replied. He stood up, and his movements were jerky, like a puppet on thin wires. The noise was too loud. We had to silence the monologue. Right then, Miller stumbled up behind me, clutching his radio. Sarge, I can't find them. I'm looking at the personnel log in the command room. Marks, Miller, West, everyone's gone. The files are empty." I looked at Miller. Then I looked at Marks. "Marks, Miller is standing right here. What are you talking about?" Marks looked through Miller as if he were a pane of glass. "Who is Miller?" The world glitched. Right as he said it, I looked at Miller, and for a split second, I couldn't see his face. It was just a gray blur, a smudge of smoke in the shape of a man. I blinked, and he was back, but his service tags. I reached out and touched them. They weren't metal. They crumbled into fine gray dust the moment my fingers brushed them. "They're digesting us, Sarge," Miller whispered, his voice trembling. They aren't killing us. They're turning us into the broadcast. I pushed past Marks and ran into the command office. I needed to see the logs. I needed something real. I found the ledger on the technician's desk. It wasn't a military report. The header read, Project Zephyr, crop rotation. I flipped through the pages. I found our names. Vance, Marcus. Grade, Alpha. Ripeness, 88%. Next to my name was a handwritten note. Optimal neural architecture. Hardened void detected. Transferred to the antenna at 100%. I looked at the other names. Marks was at 98%. Savan was at 95%. We weren't the rescue team. We were the fuel. They were using our training, our ability to suppress fear and shut it down to stabilize the fog. The fog is chaos, see? It needs a disciplined mind to act as a skeleton. Once we hit zero, it moves in, replaces our nervous system, and then it has a body that knows how to follow orders. I reached into my vest for my notebook, my last anchor to reality. It was gone. In its place, inside the lining of my plate carrier, was nothing but a handful of that same silver ash. My daughter's photo? The one I kept in my helmet? I took it out, and the image was just static, a dead channel. I knew she was my daughter. I knew her name was Lily. But I couldn't feel it. The spark was gone. My brain was reporting her as a redundant biological file. I looked at the fire extinguisher on the wall, polished brass. I caught my reflection for a second. My shadow was gone. Behind me, where my shadow should have been, a thin trail of gray smoke was drifting up into the ceiling vent. It was literally pulling the me out of my skin and feeding it into the fort's ventilation system. "Sarge!" Miller's voice came from the doorway. He was standing there, but he was translucent. I could see the stone wall through his chest. "I think I'm ready. The silence. It's so beautiful." "No!" I shouted, grabbing him by the shoulders. My hands went right through him. It was like grabbing a cloud. He smiled, a peaceful, terrifying smile, and then he simply drifted. He turned into a cloud of thick gray mist and was sucked into the air duct with a wet, tearing sound. I was alone in that room. The subsonic hum was so loud now it felt like my teeth were going to shatter. Marks was still standing in the courtyard, staring at nothing. I'm at 92% now. I can feel the silence growing like a scab over my brain. I have to get to the level 12 elevator. I have to find the antenna. Because I'm not going to be a prime host. I'm going to be a glitch in their system. I didn't take the stairs. I didn't have time. I found the service lift behind the old infirmary, a rusted iron cage that looked like it belonged in a coal mine. But when the doors hissed open, the interior wasn't rust and grease. It was lined with that same matte gray polycarbonate, pulsing with a faint rhythmic light. I hit the button for level 12. As the lift started to drop, the gravity didn't just pull at my stomach, it pulled at my mind. The zero state was settling in. I tried to hum a song, a dirty ranger cadence, anything to keep the noise going. But the air in the lift was so thick with the fog that the sound died 3 inches from my lips. The doors slid open on level 12, and the smell. It hit me like a physical blow. It was the scent of a lightning strike inside a morgue. Cold. Ozone. Dead. I stepped out into a chamber that shouldn't have been able to fit under a Cambodian fort.
It was a cathedral of brutalist concrete and glass, lit by dim LED panels that cast no shadows. And there, in the center, was the antenna. I expected a tower, a satellite dish, something I could recognize. But it was a lens. A massive concave disc of polished obsidian, 30 feet across, suspended in the air by a shimmering magnetic field. Behind it, encased in a pressure-sealed vault, was the source. A concentrated vortex of the fog, spinning so fast it looked like a solid silver marble. "Candidate Vance," a voice echoed. It didn't come from the speakers. It came from the base of my skull. I spun around, my rifle leveled. They were standing there. The Special Response Team. 5 men in matte gray tactical suits. No patches, no names. Their helmets were smooth, featureless visors that looked like mirrors. They didn't walk, they flowed across the floor, their movements perfectly synchronized, like a single organism with 10 legs. "The noise is reaching a critical threshold," the leader said. I couldn't see his mouth move. He didn't have one. "You are resisting the harvest. This is inefficient." "I'm not a crop," I shouted. I pulled the trigger. The bullet didn't hit him. It didn't even reach him. About a foot from his visor, the lead slug just slowed down. I watched it flatten against the air, turning into fine gray dust that drifted to the floor. "Ballistic noise," the SRT leader said. "Redundant." He raised a hand, a smooth, gray glove with too many joints, and touched the air. Suddenly, my lungs felt like they were filled with wet concrete. My heart rate plummeted. I fell to my knees, the floor feeling as cold as deep space ice. "You think this is a weapon, Marcus?" The SRT leader stepped closer. I could see my own reflection in his visor. I looked transparent. I could see the obsidian disc through my own chest. "It is a bridge." The fog is chaos. It is a storm without a center. But a soldier's mind, a mind trained to suppress emotion, to hold the line, to become a stone, that is the perfect anchor. He pointed to the obsidian lens. "When you hit 100% ripeness, we will place you at the focal point. Through you, the fog will gain a structure, a discipline. And then we will broadcast your zero state to every satellite, every television, every smartphone on the planet. One flash, that's all it takes. 3 seconds of looking into the broadcast, and every human mind becomes a container. The world will finally be quiet." I looked at the shard of mirror I'd palmed back in the infirmary, the only real thing I had left. I caught a glimpse of my eyes. They were almost entirely silver now. The me was fading. I was becoming a broadcast tower for a goddamn nightmare. 96%, the leader whispered. "Almost there. Stop fighting, Marcus. Think of the relief. No more memories of the war. No more pain from the loss of your family. Just the silence." The silence was beautiful. It felt like a warm blanket. I could feel my monologue dying. The part of me that wanted to fight, the part that was angry, it was being ground down into dust. But then I felt it. A sharp, stinging pain in my palm. I had squeezed the mirror shard so hard, it had sliced through my glove. Real, red blood was trickling down my wrist. The fog hated it. Where the blood touched the gray floor, the surface hissed and boiled. The pain was noise, and the noise was my salvation. "Marx was right," I wheezed.
forcing myself to stand. My legs felt like they were made of smoke. "You aren't research. You're a goddamn farm. And I've always been a bad harvest." I didn't shoot at them. I shot at the magnetic stabilizers, the 4 pulsing pillars holding the obsidian lens in place. "No," the SRT leader said, his voice glitching for the first time. "That is noise. You are destroying the harmony." The magnetic field buckled. The obsidian disc began to vibrate, a sound so loud it felt like it was tearing my DNA apart. I didn't wait to see the explosion. I turned and ran toward the service vent, my heart screaming at 140 beats per minute. I am at 99%. I can feel the broadcast starting in my head. But I have the shard, and I have the noise. The explosion wasn't fire. It wasn't heat. It was a sudden, violent drop in pressure, like the cabin of a plane tearing open at 30,000 feet. The obsidian lens didn't shatter. It dissolved. 1 second, it was a solid disk of black glass, and the next, it was a screaming vortex of gray silt, swirling into the vacuum I'd created by breaking those stabilizers.
I didn't stay to watch the SRT melt. I crawled into that service vent, my fingers raw, my blood slicking the metal. Behind me, the facility didn't collapse, it just fell silent. A silence so heavy, it felt like it was trying to crush my ribs. I don't remember the miles of tunnel. I don't remember how I got past the perimeter. I just remember the feeling of the Cambodian mud under my boots again. But it wasn't the same. The jungle felt like a painting that hadn't finished drying. The trees were smudged. The stars weren't stars. They were just white holes poked in a black curtain, perfectly still, cast in a sky that didn't have any depth. I found an old transport truck near a maintenance shed. I drove until the fuel ran out, and then I walked until I found this motel on the Thai border. That brings us to right now. This room. This recorder. I've been sitting here for hours, staring at a cup of coffee. It's hot. I can see the steam, but I can't smell it. I just took a sip, and my brain, it reported nothing, just wet heat, no bitterness, no roast, just data. That's how the digestion works. It doesn't eat your flesh, it eats your perception. It starts with the things you don't need for basic survival. Dreams first. I haven't dreamed in 40 days. You close your eyes, and there's just gray static, like a television tuned to a dead channel. Then goes the taste, then the smells, and then the faces of the people you love. I'm looking at the photo of Lily right now. I know it's her. I can see the red dress she wore on her 5th birthday. I can see the cake. But there's no spark, no punch in the gut. To my brain, she's just an arrangement of pixels, a redundant biological file. I thought I'd won when I shot those stabilizers. I thought I'd stopped the broadcast. But as I sat here in the dark, watching the thin trail of gray smoke drift out of my own neck and into the ceiling fan, I realized the truth. The antenna wasn't a machine. It was just a lens. It didn't create the signal, it just focused it. The signal is me. I'm the carrier, see? They didn't need the facility anymore. They just needed one prime host to hit 100% ripeness and walk back into the world.
a biological broadcast tower. Every step I take, every word I speak, I'm transmitting the zero state. I can feel it writing its code onto my spine as I speak. It's using my voice. It's using my memories to frame the story. There's a mirror above the dresser in this room. I've been avoiding it for 3 hours. But I have to know. I have to know if there's any Marcus Vance left inside this container. I'm standing in front of it now. My eyes, they aren't transparent anymore. They're silver, solid, polished chrome. I can't see my pupils. I can only see the room behind me, reflected in my own sockets. And behind me, in the reflection, the smoke. It's not a trail anymore. It's a shroud. It's wrapping around my throat, moving into my mouth. The broadcast didn't need the tower, Marcus. It just needed a story. It needed someone to tell it. I'm the signal. I just smashed the mirror with the recorder. But I saw it before the glass hit the floor. The fog isn't just in Cambodia. It's in the electricity. It's in the Wi-Fi. It's in the device you're using to listen to this confession right now. Why do you think I've been so descriptive? Why do you think I told you about the smell of ozone, the silver leaves, the eyeless snout in the river? I've been talking for an hour. You've been listening. You've been visualizing every word, every gray wisp, every pale eye. I've been building the fog inside your head, one sentence at a time. That's how it spreads. It doesn't need a lens when it has an imagination. Check your timer. Has it been more than 3 seconds since you last had an original thought? Is your internal monologue still there? Or is it quiet? My name was Marcus Vance, but I think I'm ready to be zero now. Don't look into the center of the screen. It's already too late.